Good morning, everyone. I just want to welcome everyone to our first webinar in St. Vincent. This is the St. Vincent and the Grenadines team webinar series that's being held by the FAN project, or Food for Change Caribbean. And I have to first apologize. Our lead of the project, Professor Mr.Samuel, is supposed to be welcoming everyone and on the call right now, but I've had to jump in because she's on an important call and can't get off. So hopefully she will join us very shortly. And in the meantime, I want to welcome all of you and just introduce you to the webinar series. So our first webinar is called Dietary Patterns in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trends, Drivers, and Impact. And this is the first of a series of 4 webinars, or perhaps more as we continue. And the purpose is really just to share with you, our team, the results of the project, as well as, most importantly, hear from you feedback on what you think, on what ways we can improve sustainability of our interventions. So I want to thank you for joining us and taking the time, and I'll start with introducing the technical team. So I'll introduce myself. So I'm Catherine Brown. I'm the project manager for the project, and I'll be listed as host on the screen, and I'm here to control all the slides. I'm the background technically. Ashley Foster Estwick and Jamal Weeks are the co-hosts, and they'll be tracking persons with raised hands and unmuting as needed, and speak during the discussion segments. And read aloud any questions and comments that are presented in the Q&A section. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ms. Wendy Michael, who is our local FAN project representative. And so she will speak a bit about herself and the project, and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. And good morning to everyone. Good morning to everyone. Let me welcome.
Morning.
Good morning, all. Good morning.
Let me welcome everyone at the same time say thank you for joining us here today for this webinar on Dietary Patterns in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trends, Drivers, and Impact. My name is Wendy Michael, and I am Nutrition Surveillance Officer with the Ministry of Health, Wellness, and the Environment in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I also act as the country representative for the Food and Nutrition FAN project in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. My responsibility with the project includes liaising with different ministries, institutions on behalf of the project, following up on ethics approval for studies to be conducted in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and overall facilitating and ensuring the work of the FAN project in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Now, several activities are being undertaken by the FAN project in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We have an upcoming activity, which is a Women's Farmers Academy, which will provide training for women farmers, backyard gardeners, etc. So if you know of any female who is interested in farming and will like to benefit from this training, you can contact the FAN project. Additionally, we recently had the filming of a grocery grab competition in St. Vincent, which saw the main winners receiving $150 US worth of groceries and 4 secondary winners receiving $50 US worth of groceries. The grocery grab was done with a nutritionist who pointed out the best and healthy food choices for families. So a part of the studies, which you will be hearing about today, these are some of the interventions that are taking place in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The overall objectives being to improve food sovereignty, household food security, and nutrition, and to reduce the burden of obesity and obesity-related non-communicable diseases. I urge you to listen to the presentations today, and let's see how best we can improve our household food security and nutrition to benefit the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. At this time, I would like to invite Catherine back to the microphone, who she will be doing a call with you.
Okay, so when you logged on to the webinar, everyone, you should have seen a box that says getting to know you, and it has 2 questions. What sector do you work in, and what are you hoping to get out of today's session? So if you have not already answered those questions, please, I'll give you a couple seconds to answer them. Okay, so it looks like 90% of everyone has responded. So I'm going to end the poll. And just to get an idea on who we're speaking with today. So 60% of us on this call are from government in St. Vincent. 35% are from other. Interesting to know who you are. And 5% are from civil society. And what are we hoping to get out of today's session? So 100% of you want to improve your knowledge about issues related to food and nutrition security in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And 25% of you want to learn more about the Food and Nutrition Project. And another 25 want to engage in civic duties, and 15% want to network with peers. So thank you for voting. And I hope that you're able to get as much as you can, all of these 4 answers out of today's session. Okay, so I've shared the results if you can see them. And I'm going to hand over back to Wendy, who's going to work on introducing the agenda to you, and then we can get started on presentations.
Okay, so our agenda for today, the first presentation would be on food consumption survey. What are we eating in SPG, and what are the influencing factors? This will be done by Mr. Samuel Gabriel and Ms. Charmaine Metivier. Then we'll go into the second presentation, Understanding Consumer Food Consumption. That would be done by Dr. Madhuvanti Murphy. The third presentation would be on can low-income families afford a healthy diet in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? And that will be done by Professor Fitzroy Henry. Note that the presentations would be 5 to 7 minutes. I will now like to introduce the speakers for today. Our first speaker would be Mr. Samuel Gabriel and Ms. Charmaine Metivier. They are researchers at the Health Economics Unit at the UWI St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago. The second speaker would be Dr. Maddy Murphy, who is a senior lecturer in qualitative research methods at the George Alleyne Chronic Research Disease Research Center of the Caribbean Institute for Health Research and the Deputy Dean for the Research and Postgraduate Studies at the Faculty of Medical Sciences, University of the West Indies, Barbados. And our final speaker would be Professor Fitzroy Henry. Professor Henry has served 18 years as a director of the Caribbean Food and Nutrition Institute, which is a specialized center of the Pan American Health Organization. And he is a professor of public health nutrition in the College of Health Sciences and the School of Public Health and Health Technology at the University of Technology, Jamaica. Now, I would like to give you the ground rules for today's webinar. And they are, your microphone is automatically muted. To speak during the discussion, click the raise hand icon located at the bottom of your screen. 2, the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen if you prefer to type any question that you have. And the third rule for today is that you must not use any inappropriate or offensive language on the platform. I will now like to welcome Samuel Gabriel to bring you the first presentation.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Michael. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. So we are going to talk a little bit about what we found in our food consumption survey in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Can we move to the next slide, please? This is what the sample or the data collection process looks like. It was a non-probability sample of the intentions. We got responses from individuals in all parishes, including the Grenadine Islands, and we had a sample size of 266. Next slide, please. Okay, so this graph here really shows that we asked respondents to give us a sense of how frequently they consume fruit and vegetables. And we see that most respondents would consume fruits and vegetables 1 time per day. 43% essentially for fruits, and 54% for vegetables. So while we are not seeing that the frequency of consumption is a definite indication of the adequacy of food consumption, but it does hint to the need for increased fruit and vegetable consumption. Next slide, please. In terms of the gender distribution, we see here that males are more likely to consume the less healthful drinks. We are speaking essentially about alcoholic beverages, pre-packed juice with added sugar, even fresh sports drinks. We see that male respondents are substantially more likely to consume these items than their female counterparts. Next slide, please. Younger respondents are also more likely to consume the less health food items, and more likely to consume let me just say that again, the younger respondents are less likely to consume the helpful items and less likely to consume are more likely to consume the less helpful items. So we're speaking essentially about vegetables, salads, callaloo, veggie soups. The younger respondents are less likely to consume those items, and they're more likely to consume items like sausages and cereal with added sugar. As you go up the age group, we realize that these items are consumed at higher rates among the older population. Next slide, please. Okay, so we asked respondents to indicate to us, give a self-assessment of their diet quality, whether they generally eat healthily or unhealthily. And we see here that just a little over half of respondents believe their diets, believe that they generally eat healthily. We see also that males are more likely to have a more positive view, a more positive assessment of their diet quality, as opposed to females. 50-50 for females in terms of healthy and unhealthy, and 55 and 45 for males. Next slide, please. All right, so in terms of education, this one was a bit interesting. We found that respondents who only had primary and secondary school level education tend to have a more positive view, optimistic view about their diet quality compared to those who would have had vocational and technical or tertiary level education. One of the reasons for that could be that, and there is some evidence in our study to support that it seems as if as you get more educated, you're better able to correctly assess the quality of your diet. While that doesn't necessarily lead to change, but you tend to be better able to assess whether your diet quality is good or needs improvement. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, we also saw that if you were married or are married or have some experience with cohabitation, then you are more likely to view your diet as being healthy as compared to those who are single. And we see that across the board here, both for married, widowed, divorced, separated, and those in common law relationships. Next slide, please. So as respondents, apart from asking them to indicate the general perception of them to tell it to give us a sense of why, give us the reasons why you generally eat healthily or unhealthily. And we see here that some of the main reasons for that are, related to economic factors, we talk about cost, affordability, and then the physical factor of access. So we see here 76% of respondents who indicated that they generally eat unhealthily said that at least one of the reasons for so doing was the relatively low cost of unhealthy foods. We also saw that access, 72% cited access as a reason, as in unhealthy foods are more easily accessible. And then we see that 61% pointed to, at least give the reason, this is what I can afford. And personal habits also rank pretty high up there. 61% of individuals who generally eat unhealthily pointed to that being, at least pointed to, to that decision being related to their personal habits. Next slide, please. We also see that the younger respondents are more likely to be impacted by the cost factor, meaning unhealthy food costs less. So that's why they buy, or at least they use the less healthy items. We see that that's, of course, reduces as the ages increase. That may be related to a few things, including greater income and greater control over one's diet. Next slide, please. We also see here that personal habits is substantially more influential in determining that dietary patterns for the female respondents compared to the male respondents. Next slide, please. And based on the findings, we would want to recommend that some adjustment to the local food system, particularly related to local fruit and vegetable production and availability. And of course, we're hoping that with the increase in the supply and availability, prices would head downward, and that would also improve affordability. We also saw that young people are more exposed to unhealthy eating. We would want to suggest that measures be put in place to address that. One of the avenues through which that can be done is through the school feeding program. We also want to suggest that that we target younger respondents early, so that the healthy eating pattern that can be instilled in them would likely carry on into adulthood. And finally, we would want to address the issue of cost, the cost of healthy foods and the relatively low cost of unhealthy food. So we would want to suggest some fiscal measures that would in the prices of these two categories of food, where the unhealthy food will become more expensive and the healthy foods will become less expensive. And hopefully that would eventually result in improvements in diet quality. So thank you very much for your attention. That will be the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gabriel. Now we'll invite questions and comments, if you have any. Remember that you can use the raise hand function or type in the chat or use the Q&A to ask your questions.
Good morning.
Good morning. Go ahead.
Yes, well, I want to say the presentation was quite was quite interesting, but I want to find out. I'm sure I heard during the presentation that it was articulated that primary and secondary school persons tend to be more accepting as it relates to what they eat and their diet with regards to advice compared to tertiary level personnel. I heard, was it that I heard or saw?
Yes,
Because
that is correct. That's what the
Right.
research has shown, and not just in St. Vincent or Grenadines, but it's something that is consistent across all 3 countries. Go ahead. I believe you have a follow-up question.
yeah, because then I chuckled when I heard that because I totally can relate and understand. But the truth be told, I wasn't quite clear on the explanation given for that.
Okay. So let me see if I can assist. So apart from the results that were presented here, there are other aspects of the study that were conducted to check that. So one of the questions we asked was for individuals to rate the relative healthfulness of a list of items, right? Some of them were items that can clearly be identified as less helpful. Our results show, when we analyze it, and we are speaking about statistically significant results, and when they were analyzed by educational level, that primary and secondary school graduates were consistently rating drinks and foods substantially more positively than respondents who had tertiary level and vocational level education. So let me give you an example, for instance. So in the case of energy drinks, primary graduates, secondary graduates give the items a rating, average rating of 4.08 and 3.94, meaning the higher it is, the more damaging it is to health, and the lower the rating is, the more beneficial it is to health, right? So primary respondents 4.08, secondary respondents 3.94, tertiary level respondents 4.26, and vocational 4.15. And that kind of pattern is consistent for sports drinks, for fresh juice with added sugar, for pre-packed juices, all the items that have been identified as less helpful. The primary respondents and secondary school respondents tend to view these items as more helpful than the tertiary and the vocational respondents. So the evidence points to that, and as I said before, it is not just for St. Vincent and Grenadines. We notice that pattern in Jamaica and in St. Kitts also. And of course, it is consistent with theory that suggests that, with that level of education, tertiary and vocational, you tend to be more informed about what constitutes a healthy diet. And therefore, when you ask to rate your diet, your rating tends to be more realistic and more in alignment with your actual dietary practices.
The only thing though is I wanted to, I mean, and I totally get the concept, but in listening and analyzing the whole process as well, I mean, I know it's a report on what you did, but it's important to say that from my perspective, I think tertiary level persons tend to be the ones who practice poor dietary or have poor dietary practices, and I think it is in keeping with time management. Sometimes you just grab something and go. You have the money, so you buy quick fast food, which is not always the best, and that sort of thing. So I mean, I think while it is true that it's understood that people with a higher academic level would know or be better able to analyze what's better for them, it doesn't always, in the practical terms, really play out. You know what I mean? So I thought I should mention, at least throw that into the mix just for some contemplation.
Okay, so what you're saying is exactly in alignment with what we're saying. So let me explain. Remember what we ask. We ask individuals to rate their diet, their general dietary patterns. So it's how they view the diet. So when we ask them to do that, it doesn't necessarily mean that these persons will not go and eat healthier, you know. They're simply assessing the quality of their diet. And what is it showing? What it is showing is that persons who are educated at the tertiary level and vocational level tend to admit that they don't eat healthily. That's really what it's showing. And they are better able to assess that. That's really what the results are showing. So it is in alignment with what you were saying. There is no contradiction as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you very much, Dr. Phillips, for that, those comments, and Mr. Gabriel. Do we have any more questions? Okay, if we don't have any more questions, then
I see that Arlette has asked a question about convenience and disposable income. I don't know if those were something that Samuel wants to speak to as well, as factors for practices.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in and say that might actually get answered a little bit when I do my presentation as well. So,
okay, all right, so we can move on then.
Okay, so we'll now move on to our second presentation, Understanding Consumer Food Consumption by Dr. Maddie Murphy.
hi, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we found out about consumer food consumption for the project, and then some things that are very specific to what we saw in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Next slide, please. So just to say very, very quickly, we did interviews and focus groups in St. Vincent and the Grenadines with different types of stakeholders, but also a lot with consumers. So this is focusing on consumers and what we've learned about eating patterns. So what we've seen is that there are changes over time, and especially over the lifespan. So for example, fast food is no longer a treat. And we ask ourselves, but should it ever have been? You know, there's a psychological piece to fast food being a treat and something that is seen as a reward. But now what we're seeing is that fast food is actually something that people eat as a regular thing. Convenience foods are quite common. It's no longer something that's usually just a treat on the weekend. It's actually more eaten in larger quantities now than before. What we also found is that children were not exposed to local seasonal fruits and vegetables. And when they were, it would usually be within a school setting, usually in a preschool setting. But past that, they're not aware as much of their local seasonal fruits. So they eat what they're exposed to, and what they tend to be exposed to is the imported fruits and veg. So they'll tell you about apples, they'll tell you about imported bananas, they get local bananas as well, but the apples, the grapes. But a lot of their local foods, parents in particular would say, oh, you know, my kids don't know about those things. We know about those things growing up, but they don't. So they are going to gravitate to what's accessible and what they are educated about and know about. We also found that food is not prepared at home as much. You know, we have a changing lifestyle now. Most people work, most families work in terms of all the adults. So there's less food preparation and more convenience food that's bought home. And that has implications for the types of foods that people eat then, and the likelihood of eating unhealthier foods if they're not preparing it themselves or don't know how to prepare it properly. We're also seeing that what has changed over time is that families really eat together. So that communal family eating isn't happening anymore. So people may eat from the same pot, you know, whether it's food that's prepared at home or food that's bought and brought into the home, but everyone's eating sort of on their own time, children and adults, whether it's after work, whether it's, you know, while they're taking a break from homework. But that sort of communal eating time is being lost, except for usually on Sundays, where people still try to get together. And we found that men actually responded that in these interviews, that they were more involved in food purchasing and prep than before. There were some differences though, because what we found is that, you know, women would be the ones who may go from who spoke a lot about going from supermarket to supermarket. They know where to get the good deals. They knew where to, you know, find certain brands that they want. Whereas men, when they're doing their food purchasing, they want sort of a one-stop shop. They will go to one place, buy everything they need, and then go home with that. So it's quite interesting to hear the conversations around that, the discussions, but they are much more involved in the food purchasing and more involved in the food preparation than they used to be. Next slide. So what we found is that people spoke about their bellies being full, but they're hungry for nutrition. So there is, you know, there is an awareness that nutrition is important and they're not getting that. Their bellies are full, but what is it full with? So consumers are knowledgeable about healthy versus unhealthy foods. They can tell you about NCDs, they can tell you about the pros and cons. They know what's good and what's not. But what we found is that cost and convenience override knowledge. So yes, the education is there, but at the end of the day, it's whether, you know, the price is right and can they get it? And then going one step further from that, accessibility is important, that convenience and accessibility is important, but affordability is still the bottom line. So you want stuff that's accessible, you want stuff, especially because people are so much more on the move now than they used to be. You want to be able to get things that are sort of, you know, pre-washed, pre-cut, you know, things that you can throw in a pot easily if you're preparing food at home. But even more so than that, they want things that are in a price range that they can afford, especially when you consider that a lot of the unhealthy foods are at a very low price range. Within a low price range, a lot of those things tend to be imported in large bulk, so they can get it at a cheaper price sometimes than what we can afford to sell local produce for. Next slide. And then the psychological side of consumption was really quite interesting. I mentioned before, you know, the psychological side of fast food as a treat and looking at that as, you know, unhealthy fast food sometimes being a good thing, a reward. Then we also had this very interesting discussion around early enforcement of eating healthy foods leading to rebellion. So a lot of adults spoke about the fact that their perceptions of being forced to eat fruits and vegetables as children, and this idea of being forced to eat it, led to them eating less now because they have choice, number one. And then they also said that they would not force those with children. They wouldn't force their own children to eat these items that they didn't want to eat based on their past childhood experiences. So this really speaks a lot to how we sort of, you know, how we push and whether how much we push, I should say, and how to really get the message out and the education out around increasing eating healthier foods or more nutritious foods without it being seen like it's something that's being forced on people, because everyone wants to have choice and we want people to make the right choices. Next slide, please. So in terms of our recommendations, you know, we need interventions around increasing consumption of healthy local produce with a heavy emphasis on exposing children in particular to healthy local produce in as many settings as possible. So if they're seeing this or they're getting these things in schools, it needs to be translated as well over to homes or to when they go out. You know, yes, you know, we can go to fast food or convenient food places, but, you know, being able to see what the options are, if they're healthier options, more nutritious options, and letting them be able to have that choice, and getting the information to allow them to make the healthy choices. Because when you have the foods introduced in schools and there's no follow through, whether it's at home or outside, the children lose interest in eating them. Interventions need to consider that psychological side to food consumption. You know, really need to think about the words we use, how we push nutrition, and to make sure it's in a way that's very holistic when it comes to health, so people again feel that they have a choice around it. We need to also include men in interventions for healthy eating. A lot of times when we talk about healthy eating, and even when we're doing interventions, there's a lot of focus on women and sometimes less so on men, and we really need to make sure that they're included as well. The other thing I want to mention around the recommendations is that we also need to focus on changing the cost of foods and how we can, you know, how that can be done. That's clearly on a more policy level, but really making sure that nutritious foods can be at a price point that is affordable and accessible to consumers. And we need to engage our convenience providers in particular, so that they are able to prep food that can be healthier, because the reality is fast foods or convenience foods are not going to go anywhere. We live lifestyles where convenience foods and sort of grab and go is very much the way a lot of people live now. So we have to find ways to engage the people who are making these convenience foods to make them healthier, to portion them out into sizes that are more appropriate. And there's some education that needs to be done with that. What we saw a lot with, in St. Vincent specifically, is a lot of talk around those portion controls and portion sizes and preparation. Those are very important to a lot of the consumers. The other thing that was very important to the consumers, I should mention, is the use of pesticides, which we found very interesting, because more so, I think, than consumers in some of the other countries we looked at, folks in St. Vincent were very concerned about the use of pesticides in their local produce and making sure that the local produce was safe because of the use of pesticides with the things that they can buy in the marketplace. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you. So any questions and comments?
Mr. Green, oh.
Yes, very interesting presentation. Two things. For us to begin to attack this problem at the core level, we need to start at kindergarten. We have to start as early as possible, and at the same time trying to not only look at foods and encouraging children to eat food, but also the people who prepare food, the farmers. We have to try to ensure that this negative image of agriculture and farming is dispelled. It's all interlinked one way or the other. If, for example, we start, you're looking at attacking this problem at the core level, a fundamental approach which we're using in our organization is to encourage families at home to start a little backyard gardening and to grow vegetables and fruits and make it a fun project. The fact of the matter is that the image we have of agriculture, the image we have of farmers, and the people who are growing these so-called healthy foods, that you find that's why you find that a lot of people are moving more to apples and grapes, because they can't see these farmers. But if you look at the farmers in the big countries, they are part of a system that make plans, that make they are part of the planning process. They're respected by government. They're respected by their people. They have a say in everything. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the farmers are just at the lowly spot, receiving a little handout, call on when it's important politically, but they are not necessarily an integrated part of the food and nutrition system. It is done by bureaucrats, and at the same time, the farmers' involvement are at the level in which sometimes they're at a meeting, sometimes they're not at a meeting. We have to approach this thing and look at the fundamental problems. Okay, if we have to attack the food and nutrition thing, it is possible to do it, and it wouldn't cost a lot of money to start to do it if we approach it at the core level and admit the real serious fundamental problems we have and the structural adjustment that would be required for us to attack this problem.
Thanks for that, Mr. Green, and I absolutely agree. I think Colleen Phillips mentioned this is a process we'd have to bring about a paradigm shift, and I was going to say something very similar. I think one of the good things about the FAN project is because we were able to speak to stakeholders on all different levels. I mean, we spoke, what I presented is focused on the consumers, but we spoke with farmers, we spoke with street vendors, we spoke with restaurateurs, we spoke with distributors, folks in the retail industry as well. And I think it's really important, especially when we spoke to the farmers, that the links between the different levels of where your food comes from and how it gets to where it goes, and the importance of each of the players in the process when it comes to nutritious food is extremely important, as you're saying. So I think number one, absolutely agree, you know, in terms of integrating and really, really engaging our farmers at a level that's, you know, a little bit higher and a little bit more, because they are such an important piece, if not the most important piece of the puzzle, because they are growing the food that we need. In terms of the school level, because I'm seeing a lot of comments around, you know, starting at the school level. And the thing that was quite interesting is that we heard a lot about, you know, starting at kindergarten. We had spoken to parents and, you know, we actually did some of the focus groups in school. And they spoke about the foods that, you know, particularly with those kindergarten and nursery kids, that they tend to get a lot of the foods that that include local fruits and vegetables. But then that seems to peter out at some point, you know, within primary school, and definitely they're not getting it as much in the high school. So agreed, it needs to start young, but what we need is that consistency, that consistent reinforcement of nutrition as they go up. It can't just start and then stop when they're in the sort of younger classes, but it needs to continue on through not just the school, but as I mentioned, that carryover to home. I'm sorry, I'm seeing a question as well from Arlette. What do you think about using the already existing food safety training for persons who are food vendors involved in food to include nutrition guidelines and training? Can it be, oh, it just went there for a second. Sorry, can it be used to build on what is existing to make change? Absolutely. We actually had some discussions about that in terms of, you know, what exists, because when people started talking about, you know, worries about pesticides, and I'll be honest, I think at the point that we were doing these interviews, there was lots of stuff in the Caribbean going on around things like plastic rice and lots of things on social media. And as we know, social media really can get things moving and get people quite concerned about what's in their food, what's on their food. You know, they were very concerned about farmers and whether they had been trained properly around, you know, pesticides and such. So I think there is room to use existing food safety training. And when we spoke to some of the farmers, they actually spoke to that, you know, the fact that they wanted more training. So that's for the farmers. In terms of for the food vendors and the ones who are including in food for the nutrition guidelines, I think there's room to expand that and to include, you know, nutritionists who can do, whether it's one-on-one or with small groups, doing some nutrition guidelines. But I think it's not just, I think a lot of times we tend to create policies and create guidelines and then sort of put it out there and expect that people will follow them or that people know what to do. And I think what we're finding from doing some of these qualitative interviews is that people appreciate the guidelines, but they still need that visual sometimes. They still need that hands-on to see what's happening. So I think a lot of this has to do with intervention and training, really being there one to show people, okay, here's what you make. Let's show you a different way to make it. Let's look at the ingredients you're using and to really, it takes more time, it takes more buy-in, but it's what makes the difference in terms of them actually seeing how to do it.
There's one more question from Keisha Roberts. She wants to know what the sample.
What was the sample size? Yes. So I'm trying to remember off the top of my head the number of present. Ashley, I was actually going to move to you to see if you remember the exact number of focus groups that were in St. Vincent. I believe
there were about four
focus groups in St. Vincent, and then well, it was just over 70 individual interviews across the three sites, which were St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Kitts and Nevis, and Jamaica. So I believe there were approximately 14 interviews in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Ashley, is that correct?
Yes, either 14 or 15.
It was 14 or 15, yeah, with the stakeholders, and then the 4 focus groups. And I mean, and that's the sample size of who we actually went in and interviewed under the focus groups with. But then, you know, there was lots of sort of informal discussions with people as we went along as well.
Another question.
Okay, sorry, I see another one here. We have seen that many persons' families gravitated towards consuming unhealthy foods. What can we do, or how best can we educate and guide these families towards grasping those things that are more healthy? There's a rise in diseases. How can we empower families? So here's my take on this. I don't think that we need to have people move away from the grab and go. It goes back to the last point I made. You know, when you speak to people, and these are, you know, in the focus groups, we had folks from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And I always go back to this one woman who stood out really, really starkly to me, because, you know, she was quite quiet for one of the focus groups. And then she said, you know, I know what you're saying. She's like, I am well aware of the issues around healthy foods, unhealthy foods, what's good, what's bad. And she was actually speaking about the fact that she felt a lot of guilt in giving her children unhealthy foods. But she explained she was a single mother. She had 2 children. She works 2 jobs. So at the end of the day, it's just easier for her to, you know, as she's running home from her second job, to, you know, grab, you know, whether it's like Chinese noodles or whatever, and just know that her children's bellies were full. Even though she said she knows for herself that's not what, if she was in a different situation, what she would pick or what she would give her kids. So for her, she was really struggling with this idea of, I know better, but this is what I can afford and what I know will fill my children's bellies at the end of the day, because I don't have the time to cook and everything else. I think what we need to do is not necessarily move people away from the grab and go, because our lifestyles have changed over the decades and we are now in a grab and go lifestyle. But what we need to do is make those grab and go convenience foods better. We need to speak to vendors to make them more nutritious, more appropriately portioned, and better priced, because the concept isn't going to go away. What we need to do is to have our say in it and to find a way to make it that people can grab and go things that are nutritious. Represented Richmond Vale, an excellent job teaching permaculture. Yes, so a separate, I actually worked with Stina and they at Richmond and Danny at Richmond Vale on another project that we have, and they are doing an excellent job doing the permaculture and engaging. And we actually have an intervention project now encouraging families to do backyard gardening. So we are giving some assistance through another one of our projects with the backyard gardening right now, actually.
Good morning, everybody. This is Mr.Samuel. Sorry for coming on late and having to leave early. I'm under a lot of pressure. But on the subject that we are discussing now, I just wanted to also remind us that one aspect of the FAN project is that we have worked with CARICOM to revise the curriculum for health and family life education, which is what is taught to primary school students. So to get to the point that we need to be getting the children very young. And we have revised the curriculum, but we realize that the curriculum is difficult to teach because, you know, of the subject nature. So we have a second piece of the project, which is looking at trying to animate the curriculum, and members hopefully have seen the ad that went out for children to enter our story writing competition. And that's a phased intervention, which we're hoping is going to end up with some more children created and therefore children friendly ways of teaching about healthy eating. So we're trying with the children, but trying to make it more edutainment. We were dreaming of doing a Caribbean type Sesame Street, but the price to do that is way out of our range. So we're just taking the first baby steps with that to come up with some scripts and then see if maybe at some future date, somebody can pick that up to fund it. So I just wanted to have that input, say welcome to everyone. Thank you for coming. We have a really good turnout for this seminar. I'm really happy. And thanks again. Okay.
I wanted to compliment something that Maddie would have said. Yes, what we're finding is that there is this difference, difference between people knowing what is healthy and what they are actually doing. And the question now arises that what do we need to do to move persons from that knowledge to action? That's really what we're trying to get to. And I think what has happened in the last year and a half, what COVID has actually taught us is that we need to now secure our food environment. And COVID has brought this opportunity where we can now grow what we eat and see the need because of the whole supply chain problems that's going around the world, it meant that we saw more persons growing their own food at home in their own backyard gardens. And if it is we're going to tackle this whole thing about having children starting from young eat in a more healthful manner, what we can do is use as farmers, as local growers, as home gardeners, we can actually use this opportunity to now get into a situation where we're growing more of what we want to have because we want to secure our own diets. And this is one where we can start by grooming, using the opportunity that COVID has brought us. Having that problem where we would want to get everything we want to get from imports, we can take this as an opportunity to change and to allow people to move from not being able to get everything that they need to now say, I'm going to have something that is local, that's homegrown. So I see COVID bringing us an opportunity to change and grab some ways that we can do things differently and help change that whole food environment from what it is right now to something better.
Absolutely agree with that. And we're seeing that.
Yes, and also in that connection to remind participants that we have launched the Farmers Academy. Please remind me, Catherine, the Women's Farmers Academy in St. Vincent and St. Kitts in collaboration with Helen's Daughters. We've gotten tremendous response. So we are hoping that in terms of local agricultural production and agriculture as a business and a success, that this intervention will also support the farmers, especially the women farmers in St. Kitts and St. Vincent to improve their skills and their performance and our diets. Thank you.
Okay, that was indeed some very rich discussions. We'll now continue by having our last presentation on can low-income families afford a healthy diet in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? This would be done by Professor Fitzroy Henry.
Good morning, colleagues. Greetings to you all. Good morning, Wendy and other government officials who I saw from the poll. There were a number of persons from government. I am glad that so many government representatives are here because what I'm talking about relates a little bit more to policy. I also want to give a shout out to Mr. Green, who you heard just now, and also Dr. Tony, who will be presenting in another webinar coming up on some work we're doing in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And a big shout out also to Latoya Matthew Duncan, who is with us. She is from St. Kitts Nevis, and she has joined us also because she's doing the same thing there. I'm glad that my presentation is coming after the first two presentations because they are very much linked. Samuel reminded us that 61% of the persons he interviewed ate what they can afford. And the question here is, what can people afford in St. Vincent and the Grenadines? Maddie and also Samuel talked about measures to improve the ability for people to consume foods by reducing prices. Well, that's one option. The other option, of course, we have to do that, but the option is to raise salaries. So this is the context in which this title is coming about. Can low-income families afford a healthy diet? The next slide shows the methods that we used. And we looked at all parishes in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The prices of 191 food items were selected, and this was done in all three countries. We looked at supermarkets, open markets, wholesales, the popular ones that people use, so we get a good sense of what people are purchasing. we looked at a computer program which will select the cheapest food items for a standard nutritionally balanced diet. Okay, and I just want to thank Mrs. Sylvia Gould, who coordinated the work in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and all of the data collectors that we use not only in St. Vincent, but we also worked in Bequia and Union Island. The next slide actually shows the some of the areas where we did the studies. The next slide really gives you the results. And this is really the low cost basket in EC dollars. And this was just for October last year. So when we looked at high income and low income areas, as you see there in the second and third panels, and we have the average going down in descending order. We see the areas in St. Vincent and Grenadines, Bridgetown, Connery, having very high costs for the same 2,400 calorie diet, $15.38. And I will be asking you to help me to explain this. Why is it that Connery and Bridgetown area has such a high rate? And it's not because of a particular data collector, because that collector also collected in other areas as well. We see this descending order. Sandy Bay came next, Southern Grenadines, Union Island, Kingston, the town, the capital. And there are two areas with what we consider high income, that is Kingston and the suburbs of Kingston. And you can see the difference in prices for the same 2,400 calorie diet in October 2020. And we see the descending order of Georgetown, Mariaqua, Kaliaqua, Leyu, and Baruli rather. And we talked about the suburbs of Kingston. So we see the average for St. Vincent and the Grenadines was $11.60. But interestingly, you notice that the low income area had an average of $12.43 versus, if we can remove that chat, versus $10.78. Yes, we could not do every nook and cranny in St. Vincent and the Grenadines because we didn't have the funds to do all of them. As you know, there are so many Grenadines, and someone is saying that they didn't see any information for some of the islands. We did the best that we could with the resources that we had. The next slide looks not only at October 2020, which is after the COVID, but we looked at the high and low income areas starting from when this project started to do this, from April and October in 2019 before COVID, and then July and October 2020. And we see the increasing trend in the cost of that 2,400 calorie basket, $9.18 going to $10.40, going to $11.40 after COVID, and then dropping. We have a survey completed in April this year, and we will see if in fact it remains low or goes back up. The low income area, again, had the similar type of increase. There was a slight drop in October, but it raised again in July and then dropped in October. So St. Vincent and Grenadines country average would be 1089 to 1145, going up to 1241 and then reducing. And then coming to the main question, when we look at these costs and we relate them to the low income earners, like the minimum wage earners in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, what are the proportions we see? The next slide shows the percentage of minimum wage for that diet. We see the 4 surveys, April, October, July, October. And we see the ranges in the high income area of about 32 going up to 39. In the low income area, it's about 43 going up to 46. And on average for the country, we see that to get a 2,400 calorie diet, the low income persons or those with minimum wage have to spend about 38% of their income to about 43% of their income over that time period on a balanced diet, a low cost balanced diet. So the questions I have, and I hope you can help me with, the next slide, please. Why is Bridgetown and Connery have these consistently high prices? I hope Jethro, who is very much into this type of thing, can explain to me, and he knows a lot about marketing and prices, why is it that they have consistently high prices? The next question is, why prices in low income areas are higher? And this is really important because remember, they already have low incomes, and then the prices of the same foods are higher in the low income area. So they have a double burden, in other words, to get a nutritionally balanced diet, a low cost one. The next one, we have to continue monitoring these rates as COVID goes along. As I mentioned, we have a survey in April, and I'm hoping that after this project closes, our counterparts in St. Vincent and Grenadines can continue this kind of analysis, because you can see how critically important it is to policy, particularly for low-income earners. Number 4, and I ask you whether the range of 38 to 43% of minimum wage is acceptable in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Remember that people also have utility bills. They have to look at housing. They have to look at transportation. They have to look at a number, healthcare, and a number of other things. Is 38 to 43% of minimum wage acceptable just for a healthy, low-cost diet? And remember that this is not necessarily the diet that persons will choose. They may choose other things which will probably use more than the 38 to 43%. But we can only measure on a standard rate, which is 2,400. It would be interesting to see if they had to choose on their own how much that percentage will be. And number 5, as I said, we will continue or try to continue monitoring baskets. We'll have internal discussions in the project of how we can continue looking at this as a vulnerability index. And finally, just as how we looked at the cost of a basket, we can also identify the foods that are what we call best buys in the different high income and low income areas, best buy in terms of nutrition and cost. So that ends the presentation, and I hope you can help me to explain some of these results. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Henry. We'll now invite questions and comments. I saw Mr. Green hand is up.
Yes, Professor Henry, good to hear you.
Yes, sir. Good morning to you too.
Very excellent presentation. Couple of points. From my knowledge of culinary and Bridgetown, they have a very poor compared to a lot of other villages. I find that their food outlet retail system is very mediocre compared to, like, say, Georgetown and other areas. That could be, whereas you know the situation, if you have 5 persons doing retail there's competition, so the price is at a certain level. Down in Bridgetown and Canary, there's not a lot of competition, so that's could be a reason why the price is so high. The other thing about it, you mentioned about Kingston. Most of the major food outlets located between Calico and Kingston. I think there's a major one now down at Buchanan, but that's very close enough to Kingston. So what you find is that the prices around Kingston, a lot of people from the rural villages would leave their villages to come into the supermarket in Kingston to buy the food because it's much cheaper than out at their village level. Because when they come to a Graves or a Massey in town or a Bonady, you get the food much cheaper. And these are the same people that these these retailers out in the villages that you mentioned about, they get their food. So a lot of people come into Kingston on a Friday and on a Saturday to buy groceries to go. So it has to do with the way how the food system is distributed. And that is one of the areas that proper planning and policy enabling could encourage, where you have a more diversification of major supermarket outlet, let's say going out more closer to the rural communities, etc. But right now in St. Vincent, you have almost 90% of most of the major activity, including food and everything, is concentrated in Kingston, in and around Kingston, in a very clustered zone. Okay, I think the government had made an attempt even with the medical system to diversify by having facilities out in Georgetown and things like that. And that is an effort, but a lot more has to be done in the food sector for that to happen. The last thing I want to raise with regards to the thing with the index and food and poverty. A lot of it has to do, we have a lot of food that is the distribution of the food. For example, you would find that during the season, there's a lot of fruits and vegetables that spoil because of transportation and distribution system. So it doesn't get to people, but it is there and it's rot, it goes to the thing. So we have to look also at the distribution system in terms of even the foods that we have available. But we have a lot of spoilage. I would say roughly about 50% of the food we produce, especially fruits and vegetables, spoil. And that is one way in which we could reduce costs and get more food if we are able to manage that at a more affordable cost. And eventually, because of St. Vincent is a low-income country, and I know right now St. Vincent's financial situation can't be in good shape like the rest of the world because of the COVID-19. We would have to do a lot in the rural communities and in our own little backyard gathering to try to get our people to get more of the foods as much as they can from their own effort, no matter how small it is. And that is what COVID has taught us a lot, where people start to rely a lot more on their own food system, try to grow a little bit of food in your backyard and try to share with your neighbors and everything like that. But right now, as a situation is, your report is quite accurate. It is definitely accurate as to the situation in St. Vincent. And we have a lot of work to do to try to address this problem.
Wendy, can I follow up?
Sure.
Yes, Jethro, I mean, I presume people work out that the cost of transportation coming into Kingston must be less than, if they have to buy it in their own areas. This is why they actually do it, because people are not going to spend more on transportation to get something just slightly cheaper, as we see there. And, and also related to this 50% of, this is amazing, 50% you say spoiled fruits and vegetables. That's an indictment in some way. So my question to you in both areas, are there any farmers markets where people can access these produce from farmers in their locales rather than having to come into Kingston? And also that will hopefully prevent a lot of the spoilage. What about farmers markets? Is that concept alive and growing in St. Vincent and Grenadines?
That is one of the areas we were trying to promote. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you loud and clear.
But the situation is, if you take a look in the Kingston market, because you would find that if you're on a Saturday or a Friday, almost by Saturday, almost 30, 40% of the goods sold by the traders are spoiling, and they would not lower the cost for some reason. They would still be maintaining the cost, prefer to throw it away, prefer to dump it, rather than lowering the price and say, let me get it sell fast. So we have been encouraging farmers to sell things in their community. In fact, we have a proposal where we are looking at farmers market, not farmers market where the farmers sell to vendors, where the farmers actually come out and sell at farm gate prices. They must not come out and compete with the vendors, because we have a few farmers now who come into Kingston on a Saturday, and they're not different from the vendors. So the price doesn't go down. And when you look at the cost of the produce, for example, if it costs you $2 to produce a pound of tomato, why you want to sell it for $6? If you could sell it nearby in your community for $3. And it is like a situation in which we have to begin to educate our people to calculate cost of production versus output. And they have a lot of spoilage, because I will say it's like a lack of awareness as to the importance of marketing. You grow something for $2 per pound, that's your cost of production. You get $4, you're happy. Why you want $6? And then half of it would spoil, or 3/4 of it would spoil. And that is the mentality that we find in the marketplace in St. Vincent. Even competing overseas, it is the same mentality. Somebody come up and they say, oh, I want some of it. But what's the relationship to your cost of production? If your cost of production is too high, then why are you in the produce? The fact of the matter, even competing in overseas market, we have a problem because of this mentality. And until we could readjust this mentality of our farmers and our marketers, we would not be able to reach the promised land of a real good supply, production and marketing system, bringing sustained income to farmers and people who are actually marketing.
But Jethro, you know that this is not unique to St. Vincent, because when you look at North America, they dump a lot of their grain simply because they don't want to carry down the price and send it to developing countries. We produce more grain in this world to feed the population, the world's population, 3 times over, but it doesn't happen. What they do, they maintain the high price and prefer to dump it. So what you're seeing is a microcosm in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. But I guess it's easier to manage in St. Vincent and the Grenadines because these are people you talk with. Yeah. And it would be interesting if government officials can, look at these kinds of results and the discussions and see how it is to get, especially low-income people, accessing these things that are being dumped. I mean, I feel like crying just hearing that 50% of fruits and vegetables are being dumped. I mean,
we're making some progress. We're making some slow progress.
Yes,
trust me.
Yes.
And a couple of small projects, one of which you funded, is helping in that process.
Yes, well, we're looking forward to that. I'm seeing the reports and they're looking very, very good. And for those who do not know, Jethro is very much linked to marketing. And the whole idea is to get these products marketed, not only in St. Vincent, but in other places of Europe. And he's got a good network to do this. But we'll hear more about that in another webinar. Before we move on, Madam Chair, I still want to get reactions from our colleagues about this high percentage of minimum wage to get just a balanced diet. It is pretty high, as you can see. It's about 38 to 42%. Is there a minimum wage committee or commission or something in St. Vincent where these kinds of results can be put to them so they can consider this? I know that we're recovering from COVID. I know that the volcano has not been kind. I know that there are lots of continuing economic pressures, but the pressures on the low-income people are also great. And I think sometimes when you have empirical evidence showing what people are going through, it's different from, just what people are saying in the streets or on social media. So I wonder if these kinds of results from the project can be presented to some commission, if it exists, or if there is a permanent secretary or whoever it is in charge of the minimum wage adjustments, so that it can be considered, because the struggles of the low income are real and great. Any feedback on that? I see someone responding that there is no minimum wage commission. So how is minimum wage determined, and who determines it, and how often? And because it has been the same thing for long before COVID, and long before, is it just let me just ask the question, how is minimum wage determined? Yes, we must try, as Samuel and Maddie say, trying to reduce the prices of foods. That's one aspect. But the other aspect is, of course, increasing the minimum wage, which has repercussions.
But government have a minimum wage commission. It's not true. There's a commission that government have that set minimum wages. When I sat on several boards, I had to talk to them to find out what are the minimum wages and things. Government, there's every country has a commission that set minimum wage. And I think that
this is good. This is good, Jethro. Perhaps if you can link with me with that, I will discuss with Dr. Samuels and others in the project to see if we can't, use this evidence to see if for them to consider it, because I don't know how they determine the increase in minimum wage. But maybe this might help, in the discussions as to, how it is set.
Well, it would be a good idea if you could make a submission to the Ministry of Finance, because they are very amenable to information like this, because they have been, to be honest, they have been looking at the poverty situation in the country, etc. So this is something that should be submitted to the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Agriculture, and it could also be submitted to the ministers who can take it up at cabinet level.
Good point. Thank you.
Fitzroy, I just wanted to jump in here really, really quickly. I had my hand up because I think the discussion around increasing the minimum wage is extremely important, because people need to be able to afford, number one. But I think I think they go hand in hand. There needs to be that increase in the minimum wage, but you also need to get the prices. What we need is the prices of the healthy food, the nutritious food, to be in a level playing field with that of unhealthy food, so that, people, the idea is that if people have choice, they're going to choose at the same price. Hopefully they will choose the one that's healthier for them than the one that's unhealthier for them. So we need sort of a twofold coming from two different angles with that.
Yes, I agree. I mean, that's what I said. Both you and Samuel pointed to that important aspect. But we have to look at it from, as you said, from both angles. And the other thing about minimum wage, if people get more income, that doesn't necessarily mean they will use the extra money to buy healthy food.
Exactly.
So but at least it will help. At least, at certain levels, there is a graph that you can have. At certain levels, they will. And then over a certain amount, they look for other things like, better cell phones and, and other aspects like that. But it doesn't hurt in presenting the data. Yeah, it doesn't hurt in presenting the data to the Ministry of Finance, as Jethro suggested. Wendy?
Okay, thank you, everyone. I just have one last question before we close. Is any of this fan project work result complementary to other SB3 projects or local policy objectives? I know that there are different institutions here, so I'm just trying to find out if any of the work that would have been presented here is complementary to what you're doing as your ministry. Or what, I'm sorry, Dr. Phillips, I don't mean to pull you out, but what FAO is doing in St. Vincent?
As it pertains to nutrition?
Yes.
Okay, so what the FAO currently is working, we're working on the review of the National Food-Based Dietary Guidelines, which we are hoping to launch during the week of the 11th to 15th, which is we're trying to commemorate World Food Day with that activity of the launch of the Food-Based Dietary Guidelines, at least the revised version. We've also done some work with you, with the unit, Public Health, the Ministry of Health, the nutrition unit in particular, to work on consumption patterns in the, the review analysis of some data that you had worked on. I think it was in 2017. Wendy, you might know a little more on that project than I do, but we engaged UE to help with the analysis of the data to determine consumption patterns within a 24-hour period here in St. Vincent. I mean, so there was a survey done. Wendy, you will help me again. You'll give more details on it. But so we're working on that. And basically, we are working as well on a parliamentary front against hunger. And with that, the objective really is to see how we can achieve the Sustainable Development Goals as it pertains to zeroing hunger by 2030. And we're working with the trust, the Zero Hunger Trust, to facilitate support to the Sustainable School Feeding Program, and so on, and backyard gardening. So a lot of work is being done from the FAO side as it pertains to better nutrition in St. Vincent. And I think the last thing I would want to say is that we've just signed on to a South project, which is with Mexico. Mexico is funding sustainable school feeding programs and funding it so that we can better enhance and even analyze where our children's nutrition is at. Of course, with this project, we have our major hang-up of COVID, because with COVID, of course, schools have been out. And we are hoping that we can, by the end of this year, at least have some movement on that, with schools being programmed to reinitiate on the 3rd of October. So basically, that is what's happening in a nutshell. We have about 5 or so projects pretty much focusing on issues and concepts of nutrition. So things are happening, and it would only enhance the work that the FAN project is working is trying to achieve.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Phillips. I think that we would have had a very fruitful discussions. We would have had very fruitful discussions this morning.
Before you wrap up, Wendy, I'm very sorry, but our colleague, Dr. Dunn, was asking a question about the volcano and its effect on the food supply in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I don't know if we have time to have a quick response on this, Wendy.
I think in terms of food production.
Well, I can ask Jethro to comment at least on the 2 projects and others that he knows about, and also we have Dr. Tony online, and she can talk about whether how the volcano affected the projects, the FAN projects, and any others that they may know about. Jethro? His hand is up, but I'm not hearing him. Dr. Tony, you're there? What's happening? Is anybody hearing me?
Yes, I'm unmuting Mr. Green, but he's not unmuting himself. So.
Well, why don't we go to Natalie Tony? She's listed there. I don't know if, Natalie, you can just give a quick response to the volcano and the projects.
You can also type in the chat if you're having problems with audio.
They're both muted. Not sure what's happening.
Okay,
so I can, sorry, go ahead, Colleen.
Probably I could chime in and try and help here.
Please, yes.
I would say that we have food production in St. Vincent, of course, after the volcano has suffered quite tremendously, considerably, really. And to be honest, right now, what we are seeing is, well, what is keeping us going is our fishery sector. As much as I believe it's as much as what 80% of our export income is based on weekly on fisheries. So pretty much vegetable, and I think Joycelyn Lampkin, you're there, you can probably share your experience from your farm level. But I would tell you production of vegetable has fallen tremendously. And while we are trying our very best to keep our tubers going, which we really and truly have been holding together, the Ministry of Agriculture on a whole has suffered a serious impact, and food security is definitely a topic of hot discussion because of it.
Okay.
So Jethro, you are unmuted now. So if you want to say anything, you're welcome to.
Yes, it's just that we have to continue to work together. I think basically speaking, there are fragment of policy interest that is shown by government, by everybody, to try for just this food and nutrition problem. I think that it would require a coordinated effort between farmers, technical people, and the right policy in place, and also the people who are in the food distribution system, from the traffickers to the major supermarket. I think that the climate is right in St. Vincent to create a consultative kind of a group that could begin to address this problem. Everybody I spoke to, from the large supermarkets to farmers' organization to government, everybody is in agreement that something needs to be done. I think what is lacking is somebody has to lead the process, okay? I am organizing from the production and overseas marketing point of view, and would work with anyone who would try to get this thing going. I think there's also an effort by other groups. There was another program I attended. Colleen, you attended that one too, in which some effort has been made to in the tourism sector. You remember that one? So there's all these initiatives. We need to sit down, pull them together, and make sure that we set up something national, like a national consultative body that could begin to address some of these problems. But the first low-hanging fruit, I think, Dr. Henry, is to send that study to the Ministry of Finance and convince them to get them to look at it in the context of minimum wage. That's a straight, and send a copy to the Minister of Finance and the Prime Minister and the Minister of Agriculture. All right, because they have a wages council here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And that is enough. I think that kind of a policy dialogue, and you'll get support from us with regards to that, is something that can be looked at. It is science, okay? It's a practical thing, something that was done. So that's the first noted. Second thing I think we should do is that I would ask Colleen, you're in a better position. We need to pull together all the different your effort, the other effort being made, I forget by who, with the tourism, linking agriculture into tourism, the fan effort. If we could find some way of sitting down, looking at them and see how they all interlink and see where we could take it from there. The last thing I want to mention is that we all sign into food and nutrition policy, which was done at CARICOM level, done at national level, also thing by thing. But implementation is one of the things. One of the low-hanging fruit that we could aim at is to say, why don't we start something in St. Vincent at a practical level? Maybe whether it's at a school level, maybe it's with groups, just some pilot projects so that we could get our feet wet, so that we could get something practical going. That is something that I'll be willing to collaborate on, no matter how busy I am with regards to this effort. But I'm ready to collaborate. Let us all see what we can do to solve this problem, or to address this problem.
Jethro, if I might, well, I definitely support what you're proposing. And I want to at least lay on the table that I know that there is a Zero Hunger Trust committee, a steering committee that deals with concepts of hunger, nutrition, that sort of thing. On that steering committee, I believe the respective ministries that are responsible, agriculture, health, education, mobilization, which deals with social issues, they are represented on that committee. So that what we can probably do as well is, it may be very, very useful to submit bits of submit not just the presentation, the last presentation or findings from the last presenter, but submit the entire framework of what's happening on FAN, submit it to the Zero Hunger Trust, because their mandate pretty much is in keeping with what we are proposing right now.
Mhm.
You know?
All right. Fantastic. Very good.
Okay, thank you everyone for this very fruitful discussion. I will now like to turn you over to Ms. Catherine Brown.
Okay, so everyone, I want to thank you all very much for taking the time to join us in this webinar. It did go a little longer than we had planned, but we did have very fruitful discussions on how we can improve food and nutrition security in St. Vincent, not just on the individual level, household level, but on the wider national level. So thank you so much for your interesting points. And we want to also remind you that this is a series of webinars, and this is our first one for St. Vincent, and we are planning to have at least 3 more. We have school nutrition in St. Vincent and the Grenadines coming up. We will be emailing you when we have a confirmed date. We're hoping just in a couple months. We have policy and interventions part 1, where we will talk about our Women's Farmers Academy and the food ingredient analysis, sugar, salt, and trans fat results. And finally, another round of projects and interventions, small grants projects and nutritional trends, looking at production and imports. So please listen out for us via email. We hope we don't bombard you too much with all of our invitations, but we really appreciate your input. And obviously, you know, you are the ones living in St. Vincent. You're the ones that have a real stake in making a difference. So your attendance is really, really helpful. So thank you very, very much again. And we wish you a wonderful day.